Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take fascinating topics and, using a stack of sources you'd be impressed by, really extract the valuable knowledge for you.
Yeah, we do the digging so you don't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And today, we're venturing into the wild world of foraging for food. We've got everything from introductory articles to personal essays, beginner's guides, all sorts, really, all to give you a real understanding of this ancient practice.
That's right. Think of this as your personal guide to the essentials of foraging. We're going to uncover what it really means, how you can get started safely and ethically, and explore some of the surprising aspects and even some of the, lively discussions around it.
Yeah.
Our goal is to give you a shortcut to being well-informed with those aha moments we all love without getting lost in the weeds, so to speak.
Hey, nice.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what exactly is foraging? Well, pulling from dictionary definitions, at its core, it's to search widely for food or provisions.
Right. Pretty broad.
Yeah. And while that could technically include things like hunting or fishing, for our deep dive today, we're really focusing on gathering wild plants and fungi.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's unpack this. You're curious, you're ready to explore. How do you even begin to dip your toes into the world of wild edibles?
Well, one of our sources, a really enthusiastic introduction to foraging, basically advises you to just get out there and start learning.
Which sounds great, but maybe a bit daunting.
Exactly. I love the spirit, but let's make it a bit more concrete. The trick to not feeling overwhelmed, really, is to begin very small. Our guide suggests focusing on just 1 to 3 species, things that are, easy to identify to start.
Okay, that makes sense.
And how long it takes to feel ready to add more, well, that really varies. It could be a few hours or maybe even several months. It all depends on the species you pick and how quickly you build that crucial confidence in identifying them.
That makes total sense. You wouldn't try to learn a whole language in a day, right? Baby steps are key.
Precisely.
And the article uses a fantastic example to illustrate this learning process. The morel mushroom.
Absolutely, a classic. So let's say you decide to start with morels. Your learning journey would involve digging into their key identifying features.
Okay, like what?
Things like their completely hollow stem, that's a big one, and the unique way the cap is attached, like directly to that stem, not just perched on top. You'd also need to get a feel for their preferred habitats in your specific region. Are they more commonly found in those damp, sort of riparian areas near elm trees, perhaps under oak trees, or maybe even in forests that have recently experienced a fire?
Right, different spots depending on where you are.
Exactly. And knowing their fruiting season is also vital for most places. That's in the spring. Although one of our sources points out that in Colorado, they can sometimes pop up as late as September. Bit unusual, but good to know.
And this is so important, isn't it? You also have to learn about anything that might look similar, the lookalikes.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Precisely. In the case of morels, the guide mentions the Verpa mushroom. Now, the Verpa's cap is attached only at the very top of the stem, see?
Oh.
And if you were to break it open, you'd find a sort of cottony fuzz inside, not hollow like the true morel.
Right.
Interestingly, the article notes that Verpa is also considered edible by some, though it can cause stomach upset in others. Which kind of highlights that learning about lookalikes isn't just about avoiding danger necessarily, but also about expanding your understanding of what's out there.
Good point.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the things you can eat, is it? Our guide really emphasizes how important it is to be able to identify toxic species as well. That feels, non-negotiable.
Absolutely, 100%. While the number of truly deadly species might be relatively small compared to the total number of plants and fungi out there, knowing them, being able to spot them confidently, is absolutely paramount for your safety.
Yeah, you don't want to make that mistake.
Definitely not. But, our sources also offer some really encouraging starting points that might be much more accessible than you think right now. Think about dandelions, for example.
Okay, everyone knows those.
Right. You can start learning to identify those properly. The leaves, the flowers, the root, right in your own backyard, probably. And feral asparagus.
The stuff that escapes from gardens.
Exactly. Which you're likely already familiar with from the grocery store. That's another excellent option for building that initial confidence because you already have a mental image of what it should look like.
Confidence really keeps coming up as a core part of this, doesn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. The introduction to foraging lays out the number one rule very clearly. You need to have 100% confidence and feel completely comfortable with your identification before you even consider eating something you foraged.
No second guessing, no, I think it's this.
None of that. Not maybe. It's like it's perfectly acceptable, even encouraged sometimes, to bring something home that you've identified, look at it again, maybe check another book, and then decide, you know what, I'm not quite ready to eat this yet. That comfort will come with time and increased familiarity.
So practically speaking then, how does someone actually build that kind of rock-solid confidence? It sounds crucial, but how do you get there?
Yeah, good question. Several key ways, really. Start by really studying the species you're interested in, like properly study it.
Not just a quick glance online.
No. Go out and try to find it in its natural habitat. Observe its different characteristics throughout its entire life cycle. How does it look when it first pops up compared to when it's mature or going to seed? Look at as many detailed pictures as you can find from reliable sources, field guides, reputable websites. Don't hesitate to connect with more experienced foragers in your area, maybe through local groups or online communities, and ask them questions. Show them pictures if you can.
Right. Get expert eyes on it.
Exactly. And crucially, make a point of learning to identify similar-looking species, the lookalikes we talked about, and understanding the key differences, those little details that set your target plant or fungus apart. The more actively you engage in this process of observation and learning, the faster and easier it will become to feel truly confident.
Okay. So you've started your learning journey. You're beginning to build that all-important confidence. Now, what about the responsibility that comes with taking food from nature? Sustainability and ethical foraging seem like incredibly important considerations. I saw that mentioned a lot.
They are absolutely crucial, and our sources really take on the idea of these kind of blanket percentage rules for harvesting, like only take 30% or never take more than 50%.
Yeah, I heard those rules of thumb.
Right. But the reality is that sustainable harvesting is much more nuanced. It depends so heavily on the specific situation. You really need to pause and think critically about what feels sustainable in that particular place and at that particular time.
So it's not just a simple formula. What kind of questions should someone be asking themselves in that moment then?
Good ones. Think about whether other foragers might be active in the same area. Consider the size and health of the plant population right there. Is it absolutely abundant and thriving, or is it relatively sparse? Is this plant or fungus an important food source or maybe habitat for local wildlife?
Yeah, good point.
And it's even worth considering if what you're looking at is actually, say, a noxious invasive weed that's harming the local ecosystem in that case. Your foraging might even be beneficial. It's all about developing a deeper connection with the ecosystem and really understanding how it functions,
Right. It's about observation again, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
And the way you actually harvest can also make a big difference, right? Not just how much, but how.
Definitely. When it comes to plants, the focus should generally be on harvesting the parts that are in season. And when the plant's energy is concentrated there, for example, picking tender young leaves in the spring before they get tough or bitter.
Makes sense.
For mushrooms, there's often a bit of a debate or at least discussion about whether it's better to cut them at the base or to pick them, sort of twist and pull them out.
Yeah, I've definitely heard the argument that picking can damage the delicate underground network, the mycelium. Is there truth to that? Or is cutting better?
Well, our introduction to foraging source actually tackles this question directly. It explains that the mushrooms we see, the things we harvest, are really just the fruiting body of the mycelium.
Like the apple on the tree.
Exactly like the apple on the tree. The mycelium is the main fungal organism living underground or within decaying wood or whatever substrate it's on. And here's the thing. A new mushroom won't grow from a cut stem anyway.
Oh, okay.
And scientific research, studies that have actually looked at this over time, have generally shown that the mycelium itself is not significantly harmed by either picking or cutting the fruiting body, provided you're reasonably careful.
That's really good to clarify. So is there a recommended best practice then, considering both the mushroom and its environment? Cut or pick?
Well, the guide suggests that actually using both methods can be appropriate depending on the species and the situation. For things like morels, chanterelles, and oyster mushrooms, which often grow on wood, carefully cutting them can help to protect the underlying substrate, the wood itself.
Okay.
But for mushrooms like porcini or boletes, which often have a significant portion of the stem underground that's also edible and useful for identification, a gentle rocking and twisting motion to pick them might actually be better to get that whole part. So it depends.
Right. Nuance again. So foraging clearly goes beyond just, putting food on the table.
Yeah.
One of our essays titled An Escape from Industrial Foods really delves into the deeper meaning and significance of this practice. It was quite powerful.
It really is. It frames foraging as a powerful way to reconnect with something very fundamental, offering a tangible escape from what is, for many people, a pretty troubling relationship with modern industrial food systems.
Yeah, it lays out quite a critique.
It does. The essay brings up some really valid concerns about the increasing disconnection from things like soil health, the impact of climate change on agriculture, the erosion of cultural food traditions, the corporate control over our food supply, and ethical issues like, well, battery farming, the overuse of chemical inputs, pollution, labor exploitation. It's a long list.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the essay connects this growing distance from nature in our food production directly to the ongoing climate crisis.
It suggests they're deeply linked. And it seems like this underlying discomfort, this feeling that something's not quite right with how we get most of our food today, is actually fueling a resurgence of interest in foraging.
You definitely see more about it online, don't you?
Exactly. The essay highlights the impressive growth of online foraging communities, mentioning specific groups like Wild Food Larder and Mushroom Spotters UK, which apparently boast hundreds of thousands of members combined.
Wow.
And there's also a noticeable emerging market for wild foraged foods. You see things like wild garlic and chanterelle mushrooms fetching premium prices in restaurants and specialty stores.
Right.
Plus, we're seeing a rise in guided foraging walks, educational courses, and chefs who are increasingly incorporating wild ingredients into their menus. It's becoming, well, trendy in a way.
It's almost like this new yet old and quaint movement, as the essay beautifully puts it.
Yeah, I like that phrase.
And it's not just about venturing deep into the wilderness, is it? The essay makes a great point that foraging opportunities can be found much closer to home, even in our everyday surroundings.
Absolutely. It offers the fantastic example of dandelions in urban gardens, these often maligned weeds that are actually incredibly versatile edibles.
Right. People try so hard to get rid of them.
I know. But the young leaves can be tossed into salads. The bright yellow flowers can be used in things like pancakes and infused oils. And even the roots can be roasted and ground as a pretty decent coffee substitute.
Huh. I didn't know about the roots.
Yeah. It also mentions a surprising variety of foraged teas, things like clover, chamomile, cleavers, lemon balm, strawberry leaf, and rose, and touches on their traditional therapeutic uses, like red clover being used historically for respiratory inflammation and skin conditions.
It really broadens your perspective on what food and foraging can even mean, doesn't it?
Totally. The essay even touches on less traditional forms of foraging, like taking advantage of supermarket markdowns or even exploring the edges of grocery store waste, dumpster diving, essentially as a form of sustenance outside of the conventional market exchange.
Which is definitely stretching the definition, but it fits that searching widely idea.
Yes, it really pushes the boundaries of the typical definition, highlighting any act of intentionally collecting food for sustenance that falls outside of regular purchasing. The author also shares some really lovely personal anecdotes about how they incorporate foraged items into their family's daily meals. Things like wild garlic butter, homemade blackberry jam, surprisingly delicious nettle cake.
Nettle cake.
Apparently. Vibrant forage salads, and even crafting elderflower cordial and wine, and mentions involving their children in the process, like helping to make cider from windfall apples.
That sounds amazing. It paints such a vivid picture of how foraging can enrich daily life in ways that go far beyond just the nutritional value. It's about the experience, the connection.
Precisely. It's about the added knowledge you gain and the wonderful variety it can bring to your diet. The example of wild garlic from the allium genus is a perfect illustration.
Oh yeah, it talked about different kinds.
Right. There are several different edible varieties that you might find locally, depending on where you are, and each offers a slightly different flavor profile and culinary experience compared to the common commercial allium sativum, your standard garlic bulb.
Like what?
Well, the essay mentions Allium trichotrum, also known as three-cornered leek, which is quite common in some areas. Also Allium roseum and the wonderfully abundant Allium ursinum, or wild garlic, ramsons.
Ramsons, yeah.
And their diverse uses, from the fresh, flavorful leaves in spring to pickling the unopened flower buds, which are apparently delicious, and even lacto-fermenting the leaves for a unique preserve. So much more than just one kind of garlic.
It's important to acknowledge, though, as the essay thoughtfully points out, that consistent and regular foraging does require a certain amount of available time and access to suitable green spaces. That's definitely not a privilege everyone shares equally, is it?
No, absolutely not. That's a really critical point to consider. The author reflects on the privilege of having the time to forage and living in an area with access to even reduced but still protected common land.
Right. And this naturally leads into a really important discussion about the historical and contemporary relationship between foraging and the concept of the commons, which the essay explores.
Yes, it draws a direct line between the act of foraging and the long history of land access, particularly in places like England, with the significant history of enclosure, where common land was fenced off and privatized, drastically reducing what was available to the public.
It's a huge part of history.
It really is. And it highlights how the remaining commons, which have unfortunately shrunk dramatically over the centuries, I think it said something like only 3% remaining in England, are still incredibly vital resources for those who forage.
Wow, only 3%.
Yeah, and it powerfully connects this historical context to a very current conflict. The widespread opposition to renewable energy installations, like the proposed Botley West solar farm mentioned in the essay, which directly threaten these remaining pockets of common land and the traditional way of life for many local communities who use them.
It's a really striking parallel that the essay draws to global land issues as well. It mentioned the forced displacement of communities on Rempang Island in Indonesia.
Right, for large-scale eco-city development projects, displacing people despite those communities' deep and long-standing reliance on local foraging and fishing for their actual livelihoods.
It's such a complex issue.
Exactly. The essay poignantly contrasts the different perspectives on green energy. You have the local fisherman's understandable skepticism about the potential environmental impact of a massive solar project on the very land and water he depends on for his living versus the project's intended broader climate benefits.
Yeah, you can see both sides, can't you?
You really can. It really underscores that foragers, through their intimate connection to the land and water, bring a crucial, often overlooked perspective to these fundamental resources that all of our lives ultimately depend on. It raises the really important question of how we can best reconcile the urgent need for tech-driven climate solutions with the equally important livelihoods and deeply rooted connections of local communities. It's a tough balance.
It really is. And this all really underscores the importance of not only being a knowledgeable forager, but also a responsible and ethically minded one. Which brings us back around to the absolutely crucial aspect of safety and developing strong identification skills. We can't stress that enough.
No, safety is absolutely paramount. Foraging is a wonderfully rewarding activity, it really is, but it is safe only if you diligently follow the established rules and guidelines. Our sources are very clear and consistent on this.
Number one?
Rule number one, repeated across How to Start Foraging and our other materials, is absolutely never, ever consume anything that you are not 100% confident in identifying. There can be no doubt, no guessing, no pretty sure, 100%.
Got it. What are some of the other key safety rules that someone just starting out should absolutely have ingrained? Like non-negotiables?
Okay. Always without exception, try only a very small amount of any new species you've positively identified for the first time, just a tiny bit. This will help you identify any potential allergic reactions or sensitivities you might have personally.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Even if it's edible for others.
Right. It's also critical to understand that the term edible can have nuances. It might mean that only certain parts of the plant are safe to eat, or that it requires specific preparation, like cooking, to neutralize toxins or make it digestible. You must know this. You must also avoid harvesting from areas that might be contaminated. We talked about roadsides, dog areas.
Right.
And always conduct thorough research from multiple reliable sources before you even think about tasting any wild food. Don't rely on just one book or one website. Cross-reference.
Okay, multiple sources.
Yeah.
Check for contamination, understand edible nuances, and only try a tiny bit first. And underpinning all of that
is identification. Accurate, confident identification. That's the bedrock of safe foraging.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the very foundation of all of these safety measures is, of course, the ability to accurately and confidently identify what you're finding.
Precisely. As How to Start Foraging so rightly puts it, identification is like crawling in the world of foraging. You absolutely must not skip it. You can't run before you can crawl.
Love that analogy.
And one of the most valuable tools for achieving positive identification, according to the guide, is learning how to effectively use dichotomous keys.
Okay, you mentioned those briefly. For anyone listening who might not be familiar with them, what exactly is a dichotomous key in this context? How does it work?
Right. Think of it like a very specific decision tree or maybe a step-by-step guide. It presents you with a series of paired descriptions or questions about the specimen you're trying to identify, plant or mushroom.
Like, does it have leaves or needles kind of thing?
Exactly like that, but getting more specific. At each step, you choose the description that best fits your find. Say, leaves are opposite on the stem versus leaves are alternate. And that choice leads you to another pair of descriptions, and so on.
Right.
You continue making these choices, following the path, until you hopefully arrive at the positive identification of your plant or fungus. It starts with broad, easily observable characteristics and gradually narrows down to more specific details.
Okay, I get it. So it's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure, but for plant identification.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Each choice you make directs you down a different path of characteristics until you land on the species name. They take practice, but they're incredibly useful.
Cool. And what about those plant identification apps you can get on your phone? I see people using them all the time. Are those a helpful tool for beginners? Or risky?
Well, they can certainly be a useful starting point. And, a convenient tool to have in your foraging toolkit when you're out and about. The How to Start Foraging article specifically mentions iNaturalist as a helpful app for getting an initial suggestion of what a plant might be.
Okay.
However, and this is crucial, it strongly emphasizes that you should always, without fail, verify the app's suggestion using your own knowledge and learned identification skills, preferably with a good field guide or dichotomous key.
So don't just trust the app blindly.
Absolutely not. Think of these apps as offering a potentially helpful initial guess, maybe pointing you in the right direction, but never as the final definitive answer. Your own understanding and careful observation are paramount. They can be wrong.
Right. Makes sense. Technology is a helper, not a replacement for knowledge.
Yeah.
So for someone really wanting to learn plant identification properly, what's a good approach to take? How do you even begin to train your eye for all those details?
The guide recommends starting with a plant that you're already quite familiar with, maybe a dandelion, like we said, or a common type of tree in your local park or garden.
Okay, something easy.
Right. And make a conscious effort to learn every single detail about it. For the leaves, pay close attention. Are they simple? Like one whole leaf blade or compound made up of little leaflets? How are they arranged on the stem? Are they opposite each other or alternating up the stem or maybe in a whorl?
Mm-hmm.
What's the shape of the leaf edge? Is it smooth or sawtoothed or lobed like an oak leaf? And the overall shape of the leaf itself. For flowers, carefully note the number of petals, the number of sepals, those little green bits underneath, the stamens, the pollen parts, the pistils, the central part.
Wow. Okay. Really detailed observation.
Yes. Once you feel very comfortable and confident in identifying all those parts on that familiar plant, move on to less familiar ones, repeating the same process of meticulous observation and detailed study. Each time you do this, you'll gradually become more familiar with the underlying characteristics and the terminology that botanists use to classify plants. It builds over time.
Okay. Practice makes perfect. And mushroom identification sounds like it has its own unique set of considerations, maybe even more complex.
It certainly does. Although, interestingly, How to Start Foraging even suggests that, in some ways, learning mushroom identification might be safer than plant ID initially.
Safer? How so?
Well, the reasoning is that you generally don't go around touching potentially toxic plants like poison ivy, right? Whereas you will likely need to handle mushrooms to identify them properly. So the risk of accidental skin contact with toxins might be lower with mushrooms initially.
Ah, interesting perspective.
But it still absolutely demands careful attention and a systematic approach. Highly reputable online resources like mushroomexpert.com, Michael Kua's site, are invaluable for beginners and experts alike.
Okay, mushroomexpert.com. Got it.
The general strategy is similar to plants. First, try to determine the major group of fungi that your specimen likely belongs to. Is it a guild mushroom, a bolete with pores, a polypore, a puffball, etc.? And then use more specific identification keys tailored to that group.
Right.
For guild fungi, for example, which is a huge group, you'll need to carefully examine things like the color of the spore print. That's crucial.
How do you do a spore print?
You basically cut the stem off a mature cap, place the cap gills down on a piece of paper, half white, half black is ideal, cover it with a bowl, and leave it for a few hours or overnight. The spores will drop and leave a colored print.
Yeah.
You also need to note whether the mushroom has a stem and what its characteristics are. Is it smooth, scaly? Does it have a ring? What type of material was it growing on? Wood, soil, dung? How are the gills attached to the stem? Are they running down it, just meeting it, notched? And the overall size and shape of the cap. It's all about building a detailed profile of that specific mushroom.
Lots of details to track. Okay, so you've developed some identification skills. You know the safety rules. Now, where are you actually legally and ethically allowed to go out and forage? What are the rules of the road, so to speak?
Right. Generally speaking, in many places, foraging is typically legal in public spaces like parks, though specific park rules can vary, so always check, and along public footpaths or rights-of-way.
Okay.
However, it's absolutely essential to understand that you always need explicit permission from the landowner to forage on private property. No exceptions. Trespassing to forage is definitely not okay.
Good to emphasize.
It's also worth remembering, as one source points out, that you might be pleasantly surprised by how much potential foraging can be found right in your own garden, if you have one. Weeds are just plants in the wrong place, right?
True. And are there specific types of places or environments that you should definitely avoid when you're thinking about foraging, besides private land without permission?
Yes, definitely. We touched on some contamination risks. Be very wary of areas that might be polluted, such as places that are obviously at dog lavatory height along busy public footpaths. Just avoid those.
Yep, common sense there.
You should also avoid foraging right next to busy roads due to potential contamination from exhaust fumes and road runoff. And if you happen to discover a particularly abundant patch of a wild food, especially something less common, it's always best to harvest with discretion. Think about sustainability, leave plenty behind for the plant population to regenerate, and for the local wildlife that might also rely on it as a food source. The article about getting started gives that nice example of Jack by the hedge or garlic mustard being a primary food source for the caterpillars of orange-tip butterflies. So even if it's abundant, maybe don't take it all from one spot.
Good ecological awareness. What about foraging near agricultural land? Farms and fields, are there any special considerations there?
That's another area where you should exercise a significant amount of caution, mainly due to the potential use of herbicides and pesticides. You just don't know what might have been sprayed or when.
Mm-hmm. Hard to tell.
Our source actually suggests if you're concerned about a specific public area near farmland, contacting your local council or relevant authority to inquire about any recent or planned spraying in the areas you're considering foraging in. They might have records.
Oh, that's proactive.
However, it also points out, interestingly, that private landowners, particularly owners of larger rural properties, might often be quite willing to grant permission to forage if you just ask respectfully. They might not even realize the potential value of what's growing wild on their land, or they might see things like berries as surplus. So it's worth asking.
Doesn't hurt to ask politely. Okay, we've touched on the ethical considerations of foraging throughout, but let's maybe delve a little bit deeper into what it really means to be an ethical forager. It seems like more than just rules.
It really is. Foraging, when practiced responsibly and thoughtfully, can be a deeply sustainable and even mutually beneficial activity. It can foster a much stronger connection with the natural world around us. Yeah. It really challenges the somewhat negative, maybe pervasive idea that human interaction with the environment always results in harm, that we're only takers. In fact, foragers often become deeply invested in local ecological initiatives and conservation efforts because they care about the places they gather from.
That makes sense. You value what you use.
Exactly. Sam Thayer's well-regarded principles for responsible foraging, which are highlighted in our How to Start Foraging article, offer excellent guidelines. Just to recap them quickly. First, be absolutely certain you know and avoid any protected or endangered plant species in your area. Know the local regulations.
Okay.
Second, only harvest from populations that are clearly thriving and abundant. Don't take the last few plants. Third, never take more than what can be easily and naturally replaced by the population. Think long-term sustainability.
Right.
Fourth, collect what you do take with minimal harm to the surrounding environment. Don't trample other plants unnecessarily. Don't disturb wildlife habitat more than needed. And fifth, make a habit of monitoring the areas you forage in over time to ensure their continued health. See how they respond to your harvesting.
Be an observer again.
Yes, and the principle of actively caring for the land while you're foraging, like picking up any litter you find, even if it's not yours, or maybe even removing invasive plant species if you know them and it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. That's also a key aspect of ethical foraging, giving back a little.
That's a great point. And the article even touches on this interesting phenomenon of forage shaming that can sometimes occur maybe online, particularly within environmental circles, people criticizing others for taking from the wild.
Yes, it raises the important point that responsible foraging, when done with care and respect for the environment following principles like Thayer's, generally has a far smaller ecological footprint than our current industrialized agricultural system. Far smaller.
Good perspective.
It argues that knowledgeable and ethical foragers can actually become valuable allies in the broader quest to restore and protect natural habitats, not enemies of conservation.
Okay, well said. Finally then, for someone who is feeling inspired and ready to maybe take those first steps, what are some recommended essential tools and helpful resources that they should look into getting?
Right, the practical stuff. A few essential tools to consider acquiring include a good quality hori-hori knife.
Well, hori-hori, what's that?
It's sort of a Japanese gardening tool, like a heavy-duty trowel, but with a serrated edge on one side and a sharp edge on the other, often concave. It's incredibly versatile for digging up roots, dividing plants, even light sawing. Really useful.
Okay, hori knife.
A pair of binoculars can be surprisingly useful. Maybe not essential at first, but helpful for identifying plants or fungi at a distance without disturbing their habitat or spotting berries high up.
Hadn't thought of binoculars.
And a rigid basket or maybe a breathable mesh or cloth bag is generally preferable to plastic bags for carrying your foraged finds. It helps to protect more delicate items like mushrooms from getting crushed and allows for better airflow, which prevents things from getting slimy. Plus, some spores might drop out as you walk, potentially helping spread the fungi.
Nice bonus. Okay, basket or breathable bag. What about books?
For invaluable book resources, honestly, I would strongly recommend pretty much every book written by the foraging expert Sam Thayer. His books like The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, Incredible Wild Edibles offer incredibly comprehensive knowledge, detailed identification tips, and great stories.
Okay, Sam Thayer.
And beyond that, you should definitely invest in relevant local field guides for both plants and fungi that are specific to your geographic region. A guide for the Pacific Northwest won't be much help if you live in Florida,
Yeah.
Get local.
Right, region-specific guides. Makes sense.
And as we've mentioned before, probably the best advice for getting started is to really focus your initial learning efforts on just 1 to 5 beginner-friendly species that are commonly found and easily identified in your area. Don't try to learn everything at once.
Yeah, keep it manageable. And just to recap, what were some of those specific examples of beginner-friendly species that were highlighted in our sources again?
Let's see. Dandelion was definitely one, super common, all parts edible, lots of uses. Lion's mane mushroom was mentioned as another great choice because it has a very distinctive appearance. Looks like a white or yellowish pom-pom or icicles, and typically grows on dead or dying hardwood trees like maple or hackberry, usually in the autumn. Pretty hard to mistake for anything dangerous.
Okay, distinct is good.
Brambleberries, that whole group, including blackberries, raspberries, dewberries, etc., are generally all safe and delicious to eat once ripe. Just watch out for thorns.
Always the thorns.
And finally, persimmon was mentioned, particularly relevant in eastern North America. The key is waiting for the fruit to be very soft, often after it's fallen from the tree, indicating it's ripe and has lost its astringency. Then it's delicious raw or can be processed in lots of ways.
Okay, dandelion, lion's mane, brambles, persimmon. Good starting list for some folks.
Yeah, depending on where they live, those are great ones to look into first.
So to bring it all together then, it really sounds like foraging is fundamentally about embarking on this continuous journey of learning and observation, isn't it? Definitely a journey. Cultivating a deep respect for the intricate workings of nature, and ultimately forging a more direct and maybe meaningful connection with the wild food that exists all around us, all while prioritizing safety and ethical practices above all else.
Precisely. That sums it up beautifully. And with the knowledge and insights we've distilled from these sources today, we hope listeners now feel like they have a solid foundation upon which to begin exploring this incredibly rewarding and fascinating world, if they choose to.
Absolutely. And here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to really chew on, pardon the pun. Consider the incredibly long and complex relationship that has existed between humans, our food sources, and the land itself throughout the vast sweep of history and right into our increasingly modern, often disconnected world. In what unique and perhaps more profound ways might the simple act of foraging, of mindfully gathering wild food, offer a renewed perspective on this fundamental connection? It's something to think about.
It really is.
And perhaps take a few moments next time you're outside. to consciously consider what wild and edible treasures might already be growing, perhaps completely unnoticed until now, in your own neighborhoods, local parks, or nearby green spaces. You might be surprised.
Definitely. As a natural next step in your exploration, if you're interested, we strongly encourage you to seek out local foraging groups online or in person, or invest in those field guides that are specific to your particular region. There truly is a whole world of fascinating discovery waiting just outside your door.